I call this study "What's in the Name." Kind of my creative way of expressing it. And in the introduction, let me say this. The topic that we decided to pick is controversial. Not just controversial, it's very controversial. And if you know me a little, you know probably this about me, that's I don't necessarily like controversies, I don't like arguments, I don't like fights, but I don't shy away from them. When it comes to spiritual things, I'll get into it. I'll talk about it. Why? Because the truth comes out in the end. In the arguments, when we start discussing controversial topics, and we discuss them long enough and seriously enough, the truth starts coming out. Because a lot of times the reason why we hold certain opinions and views and ideas so sharply and they're so controversial is because we have polarized our views to one side or to another. So while I don't like the controversies and fights and arguments, I actually am not afraid of them, because the good side effect of fighting something out or arguing something out is the truth comes out. And truth, whatever it may be, and however limited we may possess it, we have to realize that we may not have all the truth. And even after we have studied something, we may not have everything that we have wanted to get out of our study, because simply we're limited. But the good part is when you sit down and look at something carefully, you kind of comb through a topic, some of the false notions, some of the falsehoods, some of the ideas that maybe have been incorrect, they get brushed to the side because, again, the truth just pushes them out. All of a sudden you say, wait a minute, I always thought this, but now, having looked at it again, I see it differently now. So it helps you to clarify things for yourself. But whatever measure of the truth we may possess, we just have to realize that, that's more important. And so hopefully as people look at a topic that is controversial, and all of a sudden they are faced with something that maybe is different from what they knew before or what they believed, the hope for me is that people love the truth more than they love their points that they have already embraced, their opinions. And if that's how people feel, then it's not going to be a problem for them. So because agendas and these opinions that people embrace, a lot of times they're just there to traditions. They're just there to kind of prop up human pride, to make us feel good about ourselves. Truth is truth. It usually comes out. So it's okay, because not all questions will be answered, and sometimes we get the answers and we can't fully comprehend them. Let's put it that way. It's not that there's no answer, it's that we don't understand it. And that's all right too, because we should not forget that we are limited and that we're finite. We simply sometimes just don't have the capacity to accept a truth because we're not there. We're not ready to understand it. We haven't arrived to that level. So the idea, whenever I study a concept that is controversial, whenever I study something that's quite deep, the attitude that I adopt is that I should never forget that I'm just the dust of the earth. And the fact that I understand such a topic is a blessing. And whatever it is that I glean and take for myself, is simply a blessing. That I should be happy with that measure of truth and that measure of understanding that the Lord has opened to me. So what's important is not to make too much of ourselves. What's important is not to make too much of our human understanding. Because in light of the thoughts that I shared with you, it's actually comical to think that we, the dust of the earth, have this great and advanced knowledge and understanding the mysteries of the universe. Such complicated things as God's name itself, which is just wrapped into mystery. People who tell me, oh, I get it, I understand it, I know exactly how it is, and let me tell the rest of the world how it is. Sometimes I start laughing at that because it just sounds really ostentatious. So, the search for the truth should always be undergirded with our understanding of our limitations. We make the best of it, and that's really what it's about. And the purpose of this study, friends, is not to come up with some irrefutable truth or proof and then tell everybody else that they're wrong if they don't embrace what I'm teaching. That's not the purpose at all. The goal is to consider the big picture, the overall perspective, and who God is. Why is He revealing Himself the way He is revealing Himself in the Tanakh? And so the idea is to understand why our Maker chose to reveal Himself to us in the words that He did. And so his name is important. So whatever misjudgments we may have, like I said, I'm hoping that the truth is more dear to us. There are people who are resistant to change. I've met plenty of people who actually do not think that there is even the remotest possibility that they could ever be wrong on anything. And so if that's the attitude the person adopts in studying controversial concepts, then basically there's no hope, because they would not know what the truth is, and if the truth was staring them straight in the face. So, people like that, and unfortunately, we have to adopt this attitude of humility. It's possible that we're mistaken. It's possible we're not fully understanding even what we're reading in plain words. We have to understand our limitations when it comes to complicated topics like the name of God, especially. So I'm not going to stress this anymore. I'm just going to say that God's Word is perfect, and we are spiritually lacking. So blessed are the poor in spirit, to borrow that phraseology. So I call this study "What's in a Name" because, in my opinion, the purpose of a name is its effect. The purpose of a name is its effect. It's what it's supposed to do. There's something special in a name. It's not merely a combination of letters that make up sounds. It's really the meaning of the name is the most important part, what it's tied to, and the effects that name, that meaning is supposed to have. So as we begin our little short exploration, I'd like to consider the general nature of names in the Bible. I'm going to start from that perspective. As I said before, we can go into just God's name. In particular, what we have to understand is the fundamental things, the foundation of how names work in the Bible, what are they for in the Bible, why and how and why they're given, basically. What is the dynamic of a name in ancient biblical culture? Because when we read from the beginning, that's what we encounter. We encounter a culture that has ideas and thoughts about names that are very important to it. So if we are going to go from the beginning, that means we're going to begin in the beginning, right? Bereshit is the first book, Genesis. Open Genesis 5:2 with me, and we'll take a look at some verses in Torah there. Obviously, this is a big thought. If you're going to start looking at the names, and since God created the universe, then He would be the first one to name certain things, since He made all things. They had no names. They had their beginning with Him, so therefore God names things. So in Genesis 5:2, when we look at that verse, we learn that God Himself named His creation, and particularly here, He named the people He created. So look at this passage with me and see what we have. I'm going to read from the New American Standard Bible. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, He made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and He blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. So this is verses 1 and 2 that I read out of chapter 5. But what I want you to look at more specifically is verse 2. Look at verse 2. In the original, you see it says Zakar v'nekeva yivarechatam va'ikra et shemam Adam. It says va'ikra et shemam Adam, which basically means He named them man. So there was one name for them, for plural. He named them man or human or mankind or Adam. That is the word that we first encountered. This is a name given to human beings, to us. God named the first man and woman together as Adam. So Adam means mankind or human. It's a basic rudimentary word, but the name is connected. What I want you to realize is the name Adam is connected to how and why and what from he was made. Humanity, how we came to be. You see, humanity came from Adamah. Adamah in Hebrew means dirt, earth, clay, ground, whichever word you choose to use, but that's really what it means. And it's very easy to see that the name given to humans, Adam, is given, it reflects the very nature, the character, the essence of their being. They came from earth. They came from the ground, so they're named with that same name. And it says, of course, that we came from the ground, and to the ground we return. So it shows how temporary our being is. That we have that temporal part to us, that we begin and then we end. And then we return back to the source, to where we came from. Of course, Adam comes from Adamah, from earth, from ground, and guess what is he given to manage? According to the book of Genesis, right, in these chapters, we learn that Adam gets to manage the earth. His name is Adam, he comes from Adamah, and he gets to manage the world, the earth, the garden, the place that he's given to take care of. And so one of his first acts of management, one of his first actions that he has to do as an active participant in this system that God creates, is to actually give some names to animals, if you remember. Adam didn't make them, God made them, but he gets to name them. Adam gets to name them. And why does he get to name them? Well, you see, the only way he can name animals is he has to encounter them, he has to understand something about them, and then he's supposed to give them appropriate names. Names appropriate with who he perceives they are. Really. So that's the task. And so let's look at another passage where the names are given. It will again reflect the essence and idea. Look at Genesis 3:20. Genesis 3:20. And remember one more thing that happens to Adam. Adam gets the job of naming the woman too. Now first, he calls her Isha. If you read in the Torah, we just read the passage where male and female were made together. We just read in Genesis 5:2. It says Zakar v'nekeva. It says male and female were made together, and they were named together by one name. Now later, remember, God makes woman out of man, right? And so Adam looks at her and he says, "This is Isha," because she came out of Ish. Ish means man, and Isha means woman. So he calls her woman because she came out of man. So the name woman is actually related to man. It's a derivative of. So that's one of the first kind of names that she gets in Genesis, in the end of Genesis 2. But then when you look at Genesis 3:20, what you're seeing is her proper name, or her personal name that comes. Because woman is not a good, it's not a personal name. She's like, I'm going to call her woman because she came out of man. It's very general. It gives her a very specific name beyond that. So look at Genesis 3:20. It says, "Now the man called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all the living." What I want you to see right here, if you're looking at the Hebrew, it says, Vayikra ha'adam, look verse 20. Vayikra ha'adam Shem Ishto Hava. So Shem Ishto, the name of his Isha is woman, the name of his woman, he called her Hava. Hava is her name. Because from her, it says, Kihi Chaita em kol chai. From her came kol chai. Kol means all, chai means life. From her came all life. So he calls her Hava, which is word for life. From her came life. He gives her a name that reflects life, because from her comes life. Now I don't know where English Eve comes from. I'm going to have to go through multiple permutations of multiple languages probably to figure out how in the world the name Eve made it into Genesis. Okay, but we just looked at this. The original name is Chava. Okay, Chava, because from her comes Kol Chai, all life. Why is this? Because Adam names her appropriately. Remember, her name is supposed to reflect who she is. And she is the first woman, and she's the first one who's going to produce life in the natural way. Because prior to this, everything was made in a supernatural way. She gets to produce life in a very natural way. So from her, all other human beings are no longer going to be created by God as an act, through speech, through His Word. Now they're going to be made through her, by natural processes. And so because of that, from her comes all life. In a sense, all human beings, not all living things, but obviously he's speaking about all human beings. So she becomes the mother of the first human being, born that natural way, and that's why she's called Chava. From comes life. Now, if you read Hebrew and you study these things in the original, I want you to notice the word Chava and Chai. Obviously, they're related, but don't get confused because of the Vav and the Yod. Okay, Chava has Vav, and Chai has Yod. Yod and Vav do this kind of funny thing in ancient Hebrew. They act strangely. Sometimes they become interchangeable. Sometimes they drop out. There's a little strange behavior with those two letters, and it has to do with really ancient Hebrew and how grammar worked. But don't get confused over that. I want you to realize that the words are actually related. Okay. So the two occasions that so far we looked at very closely, specifically noting down the verses, is where the names were given and how they're given. And so you don't have to go far to keep reading this book of the beginnings to keep finding out examples. Because if you look at verse 29 in the same exact chapter, you will see that Noah gets his name there. At verse 29 in chapter 3. And it tells you that Noah got his name because his parents wanted what? They wanted rest. They were looking for rest, so they named him Rest, Noah. Rest. So he has a name that also has a meaning. And the meaning of the name comes from the hopes of his family. That's what they wanted, that's what they yearned for, and so he was that child of hope, that's what they named him as. And so as you study this, as you look at the names over and over and over, you're starting to hopefully notice that, there's a pattern. I'm not going to show you more names in the Torah because that's going to be counterproductive. By now you should be able to see the pattern. That what's happening is that from the very beginning, from the very starting chapters of the Torah, you see that names reflect purpose, they reflect essence, they reflect character, they reflect function, they reflect identity, and sometimes even hope of the people who gave those names. So names are not just names. There's a lot more in them. So when I asked you what's in a name, when I looked at this study, I said that's a good topic. That's a good way of kind of summing it up together. This is what I'm trying to bring out. There's a lot more in the name than what it appears to us on the surface. And so if you're going to look at the name of God, that's the thinking that I want you to have. But first is the foundation, and we see the pattern in the Torah of how names work. They're not just sounds. They're not just letters. It's the meaning of the name is the most important, and if you understand the meaning, then you understand the name. Then you understand the very core of what that name is. So, and the meaning sometimes is tied to purpose. So names are not just letters, as I said. They do talk and they communicate quite a bit. These are some of the big ideas, and some of these will repeat, some of these will not. Let me say this one more thing about names. Names in the Torah can be made. Let's put it that way. Names can be made. And the reason why I say that, because if you open Genesis 11 with me, you will see some very familiar verses. Torah, it's there to teach us. It's there to instruct us. It is there to educate us, to reveal truth to us, sometimes about ourselves, sometimes about the world we live in. And if we keep leaning on Torah, if we keep relying on Torah as the primary instruction for all things important, you will find that all foundational ideas and concepts find their beginning right here on these pages. So right now, you and I are talking about the dynamics of the name, but we're not studying from anywhere else except the verses directly in the Torah. And we're going to look at what is a name as an institution, as an idea, as a concept, and we're going to find it in Torah. It's going to give us that necessary foundation for understanding it from the perspective from which the Torah was written, obviously. Because you and I live in a society that may have an entirely different notion about what names are. Okay, so Genesis 11. We encounter in this particular chapter the Tower of Babel. So look at 11:4. This is what they said. They said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city, and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Let us make ourselves a name. Notice this. V'na'aseh lanu shem. Na'aseh. Asa means to make. So making ourselves a name. Names can be made, I told you. That's what Hebrew says. But what does it mean to make a name? Can one make a name for themselves? Yes. Can one? Aren't we just stuck with the names that our parents gave us? There's some names in the Bible that parents gave their children that I'm sure they wish they didn't have. Because they have to do with circumstances of how they came to be or something like that, and then you have to live with it for the rest of your life. So are we stuck with our names, or can we make our own names? Well, when you read this, when you encounter this in the text, you have to consider, what is it saying? What does this phrase mean? Of course this is an idiom. To make a name is an idiom. It's not a literal phrase that literally means that they were going to make themselves a new name. It's saying, essentially the text is saying that, yes, we have these names, we're going to make ourselves a new name. We're going to make a special meaning to our names. Our names are going to mean something now. And what are they going to mean? So, in Hebrew, basically, this is just a way of, the same way as it works in English. To make a name, the same idiom exists in English, same in Hebrew. You do get a name when your parents give you a name, but it also means here, to make a name means to have a renown, means to have an achievement. One's name means one's achievement, one's reputation, one's power, one's authority. See, the concept of a name is much bigger than just some word, a combination of letters. Mm-hmm. It's not, that is what the word, means in these sentences. And if you notice, I'm not pulling this out of Webster's dictionaries or Wikipedia or something like that. All I'm looking at is right here at the text. And I'm seeing that Torah uses a phrase, to make a name, as an idiom. But what it really means is to make a reputation, is to make my status, is to establish my authority, make myself famous, is what they're saying. When they're saying, let us build a city and make a name for ourselves, what they're saying is, let us prop ourselves up. We're going to become famous, we're going to elevate ourselves through our achievement. In a sense, that we're saying, and that's why God did what He did, because people got a little bit out of hand. Now, so the names can be made, but you know what? The names can also be changed in Torah. Names can be changed in Torah. When we think about an idea of a name and what stands behind it, we have to think of one's reputation. So we have to start thinking about names in biblical terminology. And if you remember that covenant that God made with Abraham, when God was making that covenant, I believe it is in chapter 12 or 15, also Genesis 15 also describes it. He said, I will make your name great. Remember that? Ve'agadla shimcha. I will make your name great. How does that work? Does that mean that everyone, when they pronounce Abraham's name, will have to say it louder than all the other names? What does it mean, I'm going to make your name great? Does that mean that it would have to be spelled in all caps on his business card?
No.
I mean, what is God saying, what I'm going to say when He says, I'll make your name great? It's another idiom. Thank you. What He's going to say is, I'm going to make you great, Abraham.
Yeah.
Whatever you're known by this name, but your name is going to sound, and people are going to think of greatness. People are going to think of a very important, a very significant person. there's going to be a lasting effect that is after your name. That's what he's saying. And so again, it's another idiom, making one's name great. Basically, God says to Abraham that he will make his reputation great, even if it's not so great at the moment. See, right now, Abraham is a nobody. He just left his hometown, he left everything behind, he's moving to another place, he's a foreigner, he's a wanderer, he comes in, he has no rights, no privileges in this foreign land, which someday God will give him. But God says, I will make your name great. So, in the future, your reputation will increase. That's what he's saying. And so then God changes Abraham's name. And in doing so, he changes his essence. He changes his character. He changes his destiny, if you want to say it this way. He wasn't maybe so great at the moment, but he goes and moves him to the next step of the ladder. Abraham's name was changed to Avraham. He was Avram, now he becomes Abraham. Father of many peoples. Father of many peoples. That's a great name. His wife, Sarai, becomes Sarah. Sarah means princess. Princess.
Oh, nice.
So their names were changed to reflect what? To reflect their new destiny. To reflect who they were to become. And if you remember another important name change in Torah, perhaps, since we're talking about name changes, Jacob was renamed into Israel. And we can talk about the meanings of those names. You know, Yaakov means heel. Why? Because he came out of holding on to his brother. Remember, they were twins. And as one was coming out, the other one was trailing behind. He was holding on to the leg of his older brother. You know, so he's named heel because he was holding on to the heel. What kind of name is that? God says, don't worry, I'll fix that. Your name will be called Israel. Which there are multiple interpretations of what that name means. It can mean several different things. It can mean the Prince of God. It can mean the one who fights with God. Depends on how you look at the grammar of the name. But grammar aside, we're talking about his name being changed. And again, the reason is exactly the same as with Abraham, as with Sarah. Names change reflect certain truth about the person. His destiny, who he is, how he's going to be remembered. Once again, we see that it's not just several letters, combined together. The name stands for the person and who he is, his character, his reputation, his renown. All of these things are tied into one idea. That's what the name means biblically. Now, names and titles. I'm going to say a few things about names and titles. In English, we draw a difference between a name and a title. Do we not? In some situations, we use names. In other situations, we use titles. In Hebrew, there is no difference between a name and a title. There's no difference. The word Shem, which you should know, pretty rudimentary Hebrew word, is used for both. It means name, but it also means title. And there is no way to differentiate which one is meant when. It's a big, sort of say, general word that can mean name and title. It can speak about your designation. It may be strange to people, living in a Western society where these things are different, but in the biblical culture, when people lived, ancient Jews, this is how they looked at the word Shem. When they heard Shem, it encompassed a whole bunch of ideas for them, not necessarily how we delineate things. So, open Isaiah 9:6 with me. That's a familiar verse for you. I'm going to demonstrate to you how this works based on this familiar verse. Remember that one's name is one's identity. Name is tied closely to who a person is and what he does, his reputation. If someone is known by a certain reputation, it becomes like a name to them. Do you realize that? If someone is known by a certain reputation, it becomes like a name. So Isaiah 9:6. Names, titles, designations, nicknames, all the same in Hebrew thinking. It's what you're called, essentially. It's how people refer to you. It's who you are. It's your identity. That's your name. That's just Shem in Hebrew. That simple word. So I want to show you an example. Look at Isaiah 9:6. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and government will rest on his shoulders. And his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. And if you're looking at the Hebrew, if you have a Tanakh with a parallel Hebrew, it's actually not verse 6, it's actually verse 5. And what I want you to see is the second part of verse 5 particularly, where it says right here, Va'ikra Shmo, and will be called, his name, Hebrew works a little bit differently, where it puts verbs first. And will be called his name, Pele Yoetz El Gibor Aviad Sar Shalom. What we see is, his name shall be called. So we see name, this is what his name will be. And here we have, obviously this verse is about the Messiah. Somebody really awesome, somebody really great. These are not just your common words that were being used. These are some really special names, okay? If you study the context, this is a sign that is being given to Israel. This is a sign that's being given to a king. And so Isaiah is speaking about this child being born and being given this name as a sign of that God is true, that things are working, and things are working according to plan. So when people read these verses, they see the Messiah in them. My question that rises to you, are these actual Messiah's name? Because if name is a name, and name is a combination of several letters that makes a particular sound and has a meaning, right? Then we should expect Messiah to be named those names, because that's what the prophet said he should be named, right? But we just talked about names being titles, and titles being names. Are these names or are these titles, I have to ask you? Where it says, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Are these names or are these titles?
Yes.
Both. Yes, thank you. Good answer. Yes, 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 and yes. Both. Either way you're going to answer, you got it right. There's actually a Jewish tradition that suggests that this entire list is one long name. Ancient rabbi said that that basically Pele Yoetz El Gibor Aviad Sar Shalom is one long name. So they're saying it's like that's a really, really long name, and that's what Messiah is going to be named. Now, if you understand the nature of names, that what it's really saying, what the prophet is really saying, it says this is what the Messiah is going to be like. This is going to be his character. This is what do these names suggest? They're suggesting that this child who's going to be born will not just be called these names because they sound pretty. The names have meaning, deep meaning, and here a very spiritual meaning that is very closely tied to their purpose. What he's going to do is important. This is his identity. This is his function. This is who he's going to be. Remember the times of Isaiah, what's happening in that time, and then this is the hope. Guess what? There's going to be a child, and this is what he's going to be like. These are the kinds of things he's going to do. He's going to be called Counselor and Wonderful and Mighty God and Prince of Peace. Wow, this will be a really unusual child if he's called all these things. If these things are true, not just a name, but truly reflect who he is, his identity, what he's going to do, what he's going to accomplish, what he's going to be known for. Because remember, that's what we've seen so far, the pattern of how names work and why they're given. And how they're given. It's the hope that and the belief that a person will actually have these qualities. So it's not just a combination of words and sounds. And of course, if somebody is going to be so great and so wonderful and so special, you can't give them just one name to describe them, because that would be very limiting. That would be very limiting. You have to have several names to describe him, because he's not going to do just one thing. Not this one thing is going to define him, but many different things are actually going to tell you who he really is and what he's going to do. So that's why the Messiah is given not one name, a whole bunch of names, because they become descriptions to his character. They become pictures, glimpses into what he's supposed to be. And so each particular name actually talks about a particular trait or a particular aspect of who he is. That's why he's given multiple names. Well, you'll see this again and again. This is, in a sense, close to Messiah, but, So names and titles are essentially the same in ancient Jewish thought. And in Hebrew word Shem is very general, more general than the English word name. Because in English word name, it means specifically a person's personal name, a name proper. But in Hebrew, it is a much broader term. Much broader term. So sometimes somebody has a proper name, but is called by another name, right? Mm-hmm. That happens all the time. It's a nickname. It's still a name. It's still a name. I've known people who have names that I never realized that that's were their names. When I saw their name on the paperwork, I'm like, that's your name? I don't know you by this name. I know you by a different name. Why is that? Well, the person chose not to go by the name which the parents gave him. He made himself a name. He had a name change or whatever. All these different things that we talked about. What I know him as is by this name. What the paperwork says is something entirely different. You see, what is a name really? A name is who you are. It's your personality. It's your reputation. It's how you are known by others, essentially. And so the nature of the names in the Bible, as we read this ancient Jewish tradition, this ancient culture, what we see is that the names are descriptive. They tell you something about a person. They project something. So as we study the divine name of God, I want you to have these big ideas in your mind, planted firmly, the foundation. Because if you don't understand the foundation, then it will be very hard for us to make sense of such things as divine name. So this is a necessary understanding. And let me say one more thing. Names say a lot. Names speak loudly and they say a lot. If people's names don't suit them, people change their names. Refuse to call themselves by a certain name and come up with another one. Sometimes people do this to themselves. Sometimes others do it to them, right?
Right.
We've known that. So, a good example of when a person decides to change their name, not their given name, but basically go by a different name, is the story of Ruth and Naomi. Remember Naomi? She had some serious problems in her life, and she says, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara." See, Naomi means pleasant. Pleasant. Mara means bitter. Her life turned bitter. So she says, don't call me pleasant because my life is not consistent with my name. I need a new name. My life has been bitter, call me bitter. So you see, if we think in this light, when we think about people's names, at least in a biblical mindset, it will all start to make sense to us a little bit more. But of course, it's not only people were named in the Bible. As you read the Bible, there's all kinds of names for all kinds of things. There are many places in the Bible that are named with special names, and guess what? Those names are also not arbitrary. They all have meaning. Do you remember how Abraham names the mountain where God spared his son, Isaac? He named that place, and he gave it a very specific name, with God's name in it, actually. Jacob, he liked to dig wells, and every time he dug a well, he named it. If you're going to study through the book of Bereshit, you're going to read Genesis, read the stories of Jacob, you will see his wells. One of the names, he was called Esek. Another well is Sinah, Rehovot, Sheva. These are all names that he's given to wells. You want to find out what they are? You got the Bible, look it up. So, in a sense, a name is a description. Something that memorializes an occasion or reminds a person about what happened or shows their character. Then the reason why all these names were given is to express a particular reality. That is the big idea, that is the big thought that I want to express as we begin to study the nature of names and how they are used in the Bible, why they're given, and that's the dynamic. So as we forge forward into our next step of studying, looking at God's name, I want you to have these things in your mind as a foundation.